Linux. I'm a reenactor. And for 36 years in the classroom, I used my reenacting skills to bring history to life for my students. And that means I would dress in the garb of the period, garb, not costumes, and I would bring in realia or manipulatives, that's fancy teacher talk for artifacts, stuff kids could touch to make history a bit more real for them. And I'd have whatever music fit with the time period and the culture playing in the background, so I had sort of a soundtrack to history going. And I'd immerse my students in the time period and the culture as thoroughly as I could. Well, I'm not in the classroom anymore, and so I'm kind of repurposing myself, and I've got this room full of garb at the house, and I have a passion for bringing the past to life. That's still happening after 36 years of teaching, and I have a desire to preserve landmarks, play amateur archaeologist and amateur anthropologist, and I like to play history detective. So my repurposing has led to starting a project I very pretentiously call my Mission Odyssey, where I intend to film each of the sites in Alta California that were involved with the mission period and a bit later, and to tell the stories of each of these places while in the garb. So what I'm doing today is I'm heading back to Mission San Antonio de Padua. That means I've left Mission San Miguel Archangel behind, and I have to continue telling the story because, as my friends and my administrators would say, I talk a lot. That's because I keep finding stuff and lots to talk about. So I hope you stick with me on the journey. Think of a mission as akin to a medieval manor. It had to be self-sustaining. More than that, it had to be profitable. And the Padres went about teaching skills to the neophytes that they considered would make them useful Spanish citizens. Near the neophyte housing were storehouses and various manufactories, such as a weavery, a room for carding and spinning wool, a carpenter shop, and a harness shop, as well as storehouses. These were in addition to the workshops that were on one side of the quadrangle, which the mission had clearly outgrown. Padre Buenaventura Sitiar, who had remained at San Antonio de Padua for 37 years, was largely responsible for its success. Besides creating a 400-page native vocabulary he used to develop catechism in the Salinan language, he helped implement irrigation and was an excellent engineer, building a dam on the San Antonio River 3 miles from the mission, along with aqueducts and digging wells. Water was stored in reservoirs and moved by an extensive network of stone-lined irrigation ditches or zanjas added over the ensuing years. Some passed through a filter house to make the water drinkable, then passed through to other uses such as irrigating gardens and crops, as well as supplying the needs of animals. The economy at Mission San Antonio de Padua is pretty similar to that of other missions. As far as what's going on, they're raising crops of wheat and corn, and vineyards are planted, and they're also raising cattle and sheep. And the agriculture's not just about sustaining the mission community and the nearby Indians, but it's also used for trade purposes and for feeding the visitors when they show up. Over the years it was an active mission. San Antonio harvested 110,000 bushels of wheat, barley, corn, beans, and peas. Olive trees were planted and an olive press was built. Grain was threshed on a threshing floor and at first ground by hand. Under Padre Sitiar, a mill race and a grist mill were completed in 1806, 2 years before his passing. The mill race would carry the water past the tannery vats to the grist mill, where the mill used a horizontal wheel, which had problems but was of a type used throughout the mission chain until the Padres were shown a better model. At its peak in 1828, the mission had over 20,000 animals, including 8,000 cattle, which bore the mission's unique brand, and 10,000 sheep. Besides meat, the sheep produced wool, which was handed over to the weaver, which was carded and spun. So why all the interest in raising cattle? Those hides are going to be very valuable. The hide trade dealt in what was often referred to as Yankee dollars or California dollars, as mentioned in the book 2 Years Before the Mast. Tanning vats for processing the hides were located next to the mill race. I'm not certain how the hides got to within reach of the sea from Mission San Antonio, but clearly a way was found, even before the Mexican government made trade between Alta California and other nations legal. The hides were treated by drogers and taken out to ships, but in order to raise the sheer number of cattle the demand called for, required that a large number of the neophytes learn the skills of vaqueros. The interest in the California dollars or Yankee dollars or tanned hides might explain something which I was trying to wrap my brain around. There's a couple of carved figureheads that are at Mission San Antonio that were brought by sailors, and for a while I was trying to figure that out. Like, why would these end up here at this mission? But then there's the trade in the hides. For practicality, the herd was dispersed to several locations, and additional ranchos and estancias outside the mission property were also being established by 1805. In 1820, a house of adobe and tile was constructed at the stock raising outpost at San Benito on the Salinas River, 6 leagues east of the mission, followed by the construction of an adobe corral at that place in 1822. San Benito was used primarily for maintaining the sheep and lambs. One of the ranchos or estancias of San Antonio de Padua was San Bartolome de Pleito, Pleyto, and it was about 10 leagues from the mission, and it was used for raising livestock primarily. And if the name sounds familiar, if you've been following the series at all, it's because I mentioned it. When Mission San Miguel was created, to the south, custody of the estancia ended up going over to Mission San Miguel. There were cattle ranches at Los Ojitos and Rancho San Miguelito, all within 3 to 10 leagues of the mission. Mission San Antonio is also going to be really well known for its breeding of horses. There was one estancia that was north of the mission at the foot of the Santa Lucia Mountains that was dedicated to the horses for the soldados. There was another estancia about 5 leagues to the east that was involved in the rehabilitation of workhorses. Yet another estancia had the mares and their young. So in some ways this would offset the sometimes lack of production as far as agricultural resources. With secularization looming, Padre Cabot El Caballero retired and he moved to San Fernando. And this gave room for Padre Jesus Mercado to come in. And he and the civil administrator in charge of the secularization, Manuel Crespo, did not play nice. Padre Mercado made things so miserable that there were 6 different administrators assigned to the mission, and the neophytes were feeling the tension, they were feeling the discord, and a lot of them vanished. So that the mission had a population of maybe 150 neophytes. One of the tasks that Manuel Crespo was supposed to do as a civil administrator, he was supposed to inventory what was at Mission San Antonio de Padua, and he managed to, in spite of Padre Mercado's shenanigans, and that meant he had to inventory the workshops and what was in them, the library, the tanning vats, the various mills, and also outlying areas like there were 10 estancias or ranchos that supported the mission. In 1835, Padre Vicente de Sarria, who had founded Mission San Rafael Archangel in 1817 and who had authored a medical treatise, the first original California contribution to the field of medicine, died of wanton hunger at Mission Soledad. The last Franciscan at that mission, there was no one left to give him a proper burial. The few neophytes remaining at the mission built a litter and carried his body some 25 miles to Mission San Antonio de Padua for burial, which makes a statement about how many of the neophytes felt about him. He was buried in the church sanctuary. In 1845, after secularization was well underway, Pio Pico put the mission up for sale. He put it up with a starting bid, was supposed to be something like $8,200 at auction. Nobody bid. Okay, this is where I'm playing a history detective a bit. We know that in 1846, Mission San Antonio de Padua was taken over by the U.S. Army, or more properly, Dragoons, and actually it was the California Battalion led by John C. Fremont. But I couldn't find a date for it, so I had to kind of dig around a bit. And I know that, for instance, December 10th, 11th of 1846, Fremont was camped near Mission San Miguel, took that over. And then he took over Asistencia Santa Margarita. And we know that he camped out with the California Battalion the 14th and 15th of December near San Luis Obispo, and then took that over. So I'm kind of guessing December 8th or 9th for the seizure of Mission San Antonio de Padua by American forces. 5 years after the Americans had taken custody of Mission San Antonio, Padre Doroteo Ambris, an Indian priest from Mexico, was placed in charge. When he was assigned, there were a mere 35 families at the mission. For 30 years, he remained there, true to his calling, an entirely different kind of man from the quarrelsome, arrogant, drinking and gambling Mercado. As dedicated as he was to his work, he could not bring the mission back from ruin, and he was the last priest to serve Mission San Antonio. Even though some mission lands had already been returned to the church, President Lincoln signs a proclamation that says, okay, look, we're giving the lands back. And that's like 30 years after the secularization of Mission San Antonio de Padua. But there's a problem. The mission is so isolated and nobody's going there. And when Padre Ambris, the last Padre, dies in 1882, there's like maybe a couple of neophytes left. And the mission's pretty much abandoned to the elements. It wasn't just the elements that took down the mission. In 1894, an enterprising antique dealer liberated the roofing tiles from the mission and sold them to a railroad company, and that company built a Rancho-style railroad station in Burlingame. The tiles were purchased in good faith, but that did the mission no good. With the roof gone, the adobe walls were exposed to the weather and quickly crumbled. A bit of the brick facade and some of the church walls were all that were left. Restoration of the mission began in 1903, and even though there were setbacks such as 1906 earthquake, the mission came back to life. So far, we have 12 missions accomplished, 7 estancias, a couple of estancias, and 2 presidios out of the way. So now, onward to Mission Soledad, and I hope you stick with me on my journey.